guess we'll just assume so. Okay.
Just a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. Thanks everybody for coming out. Dev group, we have the dev group. If this is your first time here, we meet every 2 weeks or so. Not every 2 weeks or so. Every 2 weeks on Friday at 12 to 1. Usually in this room, but depending on if we have a large crowd, we may move to another room. But this is, as you can see from all the TVs and everything all over, this is a cool room, so we like this room. If we can have it, we'll try to get it. We also have this topic, the D3 topic, was the top voted topic in our issue tracker. So we have an issue tracker where we put all our topics at, and that will be provided in the notes. If you put your email address on
building 12.
the sign-in sheet, then I'll email you the notes once they're ready to go out. One other thing, as you can see on the screen right now, we have a Slack channel that we use. A lot of communication. The link for this video presentation is on the Slack channel right now. If you want to join, that's there. If you do join and you're in the room, please mute your mic so that we don't get a lot of echoing that happens back and forth. The video and the notes will go out in the notes that come out later on in the email.
Did you send an email after the last one? Because I thought I was on the list, but I didn't get one, so I might not actually.
Did you say that if only put your name if you're on the list?
Yeah, so if you're on the mailing list.
Well, I thought I was on the mailing list,
okay.
So I didn't add my email.
Okay, so
add
your email.
So one did go out.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. So add your email. If you're not sure, add your email. I'll type it again, but what I'm trying to do is reduce the amount of time I have to type emails if you're already on the mailing list. It makes things a little bit easier. But if you're not sure, just add your email to the email list, and then the notes will go out to you. So with that said, one last thing. If you want to speak at the dev group, there's no just let me know what you want to talk about. What we tend to do is on the issue list, the ones that are the top voted ones, we try to do those first. But if we have a speaker for one that comes below that, that's going to happen first because we can't have a topic without a speaker, right? You can speak for as little as 5 minutes, right, if you want. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out thing. You can even sign up to speak on something you have no idea about, right? Because I've done it a number of times. It's a motivation to kind of learn about that thing so you can present about it, right? This is a free space. I think I was speaking to one of the developers before, and they said they were kind of intimidated by, all the people that were here and that sort of thing, so they didn't ask questions. They were lost, so they didn't ask questions. By all means, if you have a question, ask the question, because maybe half the room has the same question, but you're the one that's brave enough to ask the question, and then everyone else benefits from it. So if you are one of those brave souls too, by all means speak up, because once that first question comes in, that second question comes in, more people feel confident to ask those questions. Okay? And Brian is going to be our speaker today. Very much appreciate it. 2 weeks from now, the topic is going to be React.js. I won't be here, but I'm hoping Kevin's going to take the lead on that. So when the notice goes out to the communication, it'll have Kevin's name on it. If you want questions or comments or anything like that, direct them to Kevin for the.
Who's actually, I'm the facilitator or whatever. Who's actually speaking on the presentation?
His name's already on in issues. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it's already assigned. Everything's lined up. It's just getting the pizza, being the point of contact for questions, that sort of thing. Kevin's going to handle that as well. Okay. With that, I've spoken way longer than I expected. Brian, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Andre. I'm Bryant, and I work in 699 as a dev. And I'm a web developer, and I use D3.js a lot for data visualization for multiple missions, actually. So I decided I want to speak about this thing. So, a guide to data-driven documents. So what is D3? It's a JavaScript library used for data visualization that uses the current SVG, HTML5, and CSS standards. So, for example, if there's a new element put out tomorrow, like the canvas was put out recently, and the video and the audio, it doesn't need any updates, and it can work right away. It has a really unique way to select the different DOM nodes, which I'll get into later, and it handles like jQuery with updating like attributes and styles of different HTML elements.
Brian, question. What does SVG stand for?
Yep. So that's scalable vector graphics, and I have a whole slide on that. So I'll start from the beginning. So back in the early 90s, when the first web browsers came out, everything was static HTML page. You had to click, click to move to the next page or interact. But once JavaScript became adopted as the de facto.
1 second, Brian. Can you share your screen?
Yeah. How do I do that?
Go back to Hangouts. Top right, green. And then share screen. Oh, cool.
Cool. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep. So then when JavaScript became the de facto scripting language for the web, there was the document object model, which we call DOM, which basically the browser turns your HTML document into a tree structure that allows JavaScript to document the get elements by tag name, and then manually iterate through each of the paragraphs, and then change the color that way. The D3 way of doing things with smart selection is by D3 select all, and then whatever tag, and then just updating the style right there.
Does the functionality just like one of them singularly still exist?
To just select one? Yeah, there is also a D3.select, and you can, I'll show you that there's, very specific ways you can actually.
Is the sharing drop off for a second?
Okay. Great. It's weird.
Yeah, sorry.
I wonder if it's when I leave the presentation or something. Okay, so there are very specific ways that you can grab anything that's part of the DOM. So you can select by tags, so any paragraph, the body, SVG element. You could select by class. So for example, in one of my diagrams I created a class called gas particles, and then when I want to update that, it's just select all gas particles. You can select by a specific ID. So if you have an identifier on one of your HTML elements, you can select that way. You can select by attribute, so anything that's red. I mean, if you're really that specific about what you want, you can select that way. And containment, so just kind of like its parent, child. Yeah, so all you get in return is an array of the matching nodes, which you can then update. You can change the data, you can change the attribute style, add events to them. And selections can be nested, so I'll show you what I mean by that. When you're creating new nodes, so an example of the nested is the d3.selectBody.selectAll p. So you're selecting all the paragraphs just within the body, you're ignoring the head or the whatever else, wherever else there might be a paragraph. So creating new nodes is pretty simple with D3. All you have to do is attach your data to after you do your selection, then run the enter function and then append whatever HTML element you want. So initially, when I'm creating something, I'll select the body, I'll have all my data that I want to put in, and then enter, and then append an SVG element. And then within that is where I go from there. So this is an example of just how to create paragraphs with an arbitrary array of numbers. But you can put any type of data you want in there. So I have an entire JSON file, I'll show you, of just all the components that are part of, the MoMA diagram. So, and each of these have their own characteristics, but yeah. So we actually use this to create the component database with all of this. So I could either have fetched it from a database, or I just have this local JSON file. But this is basically what I pass into.
And that defines the diagram?
Yep, and that defines the diagram. This diagram here is built all through D3, and these different components are drawn different ways and have their own functionality. But it's really easy, like compartmentalize and set up exactly how you like with D3. You get a lot of control over what the final product looks like, which is really nice. So that's creating new nodes, matches your data, removing nodes. So say we had the 6 paragraphs from before, but now our data changed to just be 2. If you can just reassign the data to the same paragraph elements, but however there's 4 that are no longer assigned to data. So then you just run the exit dot remove, and that would remove the HTML elements from the page. So it's really convenient. You don't have to keep track of what's currently being used, because it can take care of that for you. There's 3 main stages, which is creating the elements, updating the attributes, and then removing them, removing any unnecessary. So the nice thing about D3 is that there's also dynamic properties. So when you're setting, for example, the size of the chambers in my diagram, I want it to be based off the configuration of like what the scale is, because you can change it to blow it up or larger than that. So to be able to have a function that defines the x, the y, the width is really nice, instead of having to do all the math and then assigning a constant value. So yeah, it's great for updating values as well. So the colors change depending on the temperature. So something like that, all I have to do is run the update, and the one function is universal for several of the components. And then so yeah, updating styles and events is really simple too. So just on-click functions, the style, and the function D, it just passes in the data associated with that element. So it makes it really, really convenient.
Is that Angular in there too?
Yep, it's Angular in there too. So transitions, it's pretty amazing, the D3 interpolate. So all you need to specify is a start and an end frame. Usually a start frame is just the current configuration. The end state is whatever you specify as the attributes, the styles. And interpolate does all the rest of the work. There's some things that can't be interpolated, but paths work great. Colors.
Linear interpolation?
They have a lot of stuff. I don't know. It's, yeah. Yeah. It's pretty complex. But I'll show you an example of what I. Yeah. So it's nice and pretty easy to set up. There's delay, duration, stylistic elements, like you can make movement along a path elastic or fluid or come to an abrupt halt, you know, to specify kind of how it travels. But so for example, on the gas paths, you know, these are the gas particles just traveling through. So this is just a transition happening along this path that I specified.
But did you create a library specific for spacecraft schematics that you can share
No, I didn't.
so others can leverage them?
Yeah. This I pretty much did it twice though. I did it for this and then a SAM diagram as well. But yeah, so this was the first one. I think that was about 2 years ago. So, okay. All right, Kareem has a demo about D3 and Rails. You want HCMI? Yeah. Thanks.
Are you on the Hangouts? There's a link in the use the link from.
I'll send it to him.
You go to the Slack channel and then click that. Then the broader GSFC dev group, the link right there.
How do we do this?
We can't see Slack here.
No. Make sure this stuff.
This is a guest camera.
Slack website. Yeah, that's
Thanks. Apparently, I think it stopped screen sharing
Oh, yeah.
anyways. I think it keeps dropping.
All right. So for the people online, we're working on the connection. It'll be on very shortly. Are you still presenting?
No, I'm muted.
You're muted. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got some crazy password. All right, let's see.
Actually, no, let me just email you the link.
Yeah, we could just send the link.
Yeah, that works.
Ah, I just reset. Curious.
Yes.
Oh, email's on the way.
You sent it to Lisa.
Yeah.
Just have an idea. So this is
Okay, like it. Oh.
It's part of this.
Yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah, it's part of it. Part of it's the fact. That's like the project. It's just
initial catch, right?
Right. Yes. Okay. That's the picture.
Awesome. All right.
Is that me?
Yeah,
That's me. That's me.
That was you?
No,
Okay.
I'm muted now, so you're good. That's one thing that was from earlier.
All right.
Everyone online was like, "Hey, the audio dropped off." I'm like, yeah, we're working
Now,
on it.
and then I'm supposed to share this big screen. Were you able to do that? Were you able to
Yeah.
do an extended display and share that?
I think he wasn't mirroring.
No,
Yeah, he was mirroring was his.
Oh, you were just mirroring? Okay, let me do that then. You guys get to see my crazy mix of windows all over the place. Okay. Can people see?
No, turn off video. No, on the left. No, the cancel button. No. To the left
The green one.
of the bars.
Yeah,
This
there you
one?
go. That one. And then pick your desktop.
Ah, there we go.
And you just drop that up the frame.
All right, cool.
Technical difficulties. Because computers are hard.
They're hard.
Steve,
All right, let's see. Hangouts.
So those people online, we work hard for you guys. We do.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, let me in.
Click join. Yep. Now we can see you again.
All right. Was that me or you? Or?
I just had to let them know. I know they're about to start saying, hey,
Gotcha.
what happened?
don't
That was never good.
Can people hear me okay?
They're waving their head.
All right, cool. So what I'm gonna do now is move this here and then minimize it.
Yeah.
People can still see everything, right? All right, cool. So I'm Kareem Saeed. I work at headquarters. I'm usually a security guy. In a past life, I was a really bad HCI researcher, and I was obsessed with data visualization. So that was like my thing. This is an old talk that I gave a couple times to a bunch of different groups. It's really more of a Ruby on Rails and how to integrate other tools into your pipeline type of talk, but it's D3 heavy. It's focused on D3. There's this element of like data viz is neat, so that's what we'll be going over here. I'm going to try to do some live coding, but really it's going to be like cooking channel stuff where I actually have everything kind of running already. And so I'll show you guys code snippets and everything, but anybody who wants to work this thing from the beginning, go to my personal GitHub account. My name online is Egyptian Kareem. I've got these two repos. One is called Zips, which is filled with a bunch of different collections of zip codes across the United States. There's like 43,000 of them or something, some big number. Oh, I'll show you guys that in a second. And where's the other thing? And then there's another one. Yeah, so there's this other repo called Zippy, which is just the demo, and if you go through it, the README is like a step-by-step walkthrough of how to build this using Rails. So if you wanted to go home or afterwards or whatever and kind of do this from the bottom up, get a little bit of an introduction to Rails, get a little bit of an introduction to D3, then you can just go through this step-by-step. It's pretty, this was originally developed for a code school group that like was a bunch of newbie developers trying to learn stuff, so it's very step-by-step. If you follow this step-by-step, you'll end up with a thing that works at the end. So yeah, so there's that. Then there's a couple of little extra things that are useful, like my Ruby on Rails template for bootstrapping an application really quickly and stuff like that, that you can have free of charge. So just to do a quick introduction to data viz and D3 in particular, I always like to give a couple of quote-unquote academic references. The main one here is Mike Bostock, who maintains the page. He's the primary developer on D3. He works for the New York Times database team. Yeah, he's really smart. Did he leave? Oh, okay, he's gone now. So he still maintains his repos and everything, so he's still active. I don't know where he is, but he maintains this site called Blocks, which is useful to know about because it's a bunch of community-submitted D3 visualizations that you can essentially go look at and grab, and you can just download the JavaScript and repurpose it for your purposes. Repurpose for your purposes. So he's a cool guy. You guys should look him up. He's awesome. Ben Fry is another kind of academic reference that I like to throw out a lot. He wrote his doctoral dissertation at MIT Media Lab back in like the 90s, late 90s, on computer information visualization, and he's a really smart guy. He developed a thing called processing, which was like, it's now considered, I guess, a somewhat dated tool set for doing visualizations. I remember using it at one point in time. It made like these really nice little Java applets that you could just drop onto a web page, and it did a visualization for you. And then also, just kind of incidentally, we live in an area with a lot of leading knowledge in data visualization. So obviously there are a lot of academics here at Goddard that do a ton of data visualization who are really well known throughout the community. And then also at College Park, we have Ben Schneiderman, who is like forefather of data viz and direct interfaces, who has many publications to his name and worth looking into. All right, so showed you guys this. This is the repository where you can go get Zippy and walk through the demo, one like step by step. The basic idea is I set up a skeleton Ruby on Rails application using my nifty template, which you can also get from the GitHub page. I grab a whole, well, actually, I create a model inside of my Rails application so that I can point at the data, which I will later import into a database, all of the names and zip codes for cities across the United States, some 40-some thousand of them or whatever. I do a DB migrate. And are people in here Rails people at all?
This words all make sense though.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of like Railsy things here. So a DB migrate says, hey, I just created a model, which is a Ruby file that describes like a layout for a data object of some kind. And then migrate pushes that through an ORM and creates all of my stuff in my database for me all nice and neat, which is great. The seeds file takes this big old seeds file and populates my database with a whole bunch of data, the aforementioned 40-some thousand zip codes. If you go here, you can see I've got my seeds RB file here. I wonder if I'll break stuff if I open it. Yeah, so it's big. Let's break, yeah. So it's a whole bunch of zip codes. Longitude, latitude, zip code, friendly name, state. That's pretty much it, right?
Does it show like does it take the balance of the zip code?
No, it does not. It gives you like a center of mass coordinate. That's about it. Yeah. So it's like this is the middle of this zip code essentially. Yeah. For our purposes, good enough. So all of this is going to actually be doing a D3 version of one of Ben Fry's first examples of how data viz can be useful. So if you go and get his O'Reilly book, Data Visualization, the first thing he walks you through is like, let's build a map of the United States using the zip codes. This is, and he built processing, so he does the demo in processing. This is my D3 translation of that. So yeah, a little bit of background there. So okay, so I create a bunch of stuff. I set the stage. These are my basic actions, which say, hey, give me all of the zip codes and set them up to do some things. I create routes. This is all very useful to the newbie Rails developer who's still figuring out how to like link their pages to their actions and stuff like that. Little hello world page, integrating our tools. So this is the important part when I'm giving that talk usually, because it talks about how to integrate JavaScript tools into your Rails pipeline, which is like a big deal. So you can then at that point use any of the nifty JavaScript libraries you find online. And then here, the first part is creating a histogram. So this is the first time we kind of use D3 to do something. And the way that we do that is inside of this little action called zip hist, which I can pull up. I'll slide over and show you guys the code for that in a second. I make a call to my table in my database using the ORM, zip.all.groupByState, and give me the count, right? So what this does is it returns a JSON object to me that contains all of the data in my big database of 43,000 zip codes grouped by state, and so it gives me the state and then comma the count, the number of things that got grouped into that. And it returns it to me as a big old JSON. I format that and I send it over to be rendered. This is all inside of my controller. This is the zip hist action. And then you can see here the basic pattern we follow to pass our data to our views JavaScript resources for rendering is to essentially set up a little model, a helper, which calls a rendered version of the page. So let's go over to here, and we can see this is the basic layout for a Rails application. The assets, actually, so if we go down to vendor, that's where I keep all of my assets that I download from the internet. You can see D3.js. That's important. No, it doesn't come with any images. That's all bootstrap stuff. If we come back up to controllers, we can see that the welcome controller, which is just kind of where I throw all my stuff, this is just like, this is what renders the static welcome page. And we can see the actual layout. So we can see zip hist here. This was the snippet of code that was in GitHub that we looked at. It renders JSON zip hist. And the associated, let me see here. You guys can see I'm a little bit rusty on this particular demonstration. Here I call my custom ziphist.json URL, which is what triggers that action. I create my D3.json object. If there's an error, I throw an error. Otherwise, I call a helper method called render zip histogram, which should be defined up here in my helpers. Nope. Where is it? Anybody know where my helper method is? No. Yeah.
That's fun.
There we go. It's inside of my custom written JavaScripts, which I'm storing in my application assets. And you can see here, this is where I start to do all of my special D3 calls. Now for the histogram, which is just a grouped binning of counts, right? Just a bar chart of binned counts. What I do is I actually create an SVG, scalable vector graphic. Side note, so you mentioned scalable vector graphics and why they're cool. So this is the NASA worm is a scalable vector graphic, right? And if we inspect the element here, we can see that it's just a bunch of paths. So it's actually just describing like this point to this point is connected via this curve and color it this color, which is why you can scale it infinitely and it'll never pixelate because it's not a bitmap, it's not a pixel map. So anyway, that's small aside. These decompose really well into PNGs of any size that you want, which is the benefit of using SVGs. So I create an x-axis, which I scale according to a certain range. I do the same thing with the y-axis. I put some labels on them. I add some ticking and some orientation. This is all just style stuff, which is described really well in the D3 documentation. So if you go to Mike Bostock's page, or rather the D3 page, there's a whole API reference which he maintains, which tells you all about all of the different things that are available to manipulate any D3 object, whether it's an axis, whether it's a circle, whether it's anything you can think of that D3 produces, which is a whole lot of different things. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So I was yawning.
Oh, it's okay. Yawning. That's a bad sign for me.
That's dark in here. It's not helping.
I select, so this is very jQuery driven, as was mentioned before, so I actually do like an ID-based select here on an object which is in my DOM. It's a placeholder. When I created that view, I actually dropped a thing on there that said, hey, this div, call it histogram. This is where I'm going to throw my histogram once it's ready and prepped. This is where I do that selection. I append an SVG to it. I do all of my fancy stuff here, which is described in great detail on the GitHub repo for anybody who goes and does that later. And then I proceed to add bars, which I style accordingly. And this is how it's done. You append the bars to the histogram, which is an SVG. I append a rectangle to all those various bars. I add text for labeling. And then finally, down here, it all just gets rendered. So, magic of TV, what does that end up looking like? You end up with, and I hope I'm running it, you end up with this guy right here up at the top. Now each one of these is an SVG object, so if we go down and look at it, you can see that there's an associated rectangle, which was appended to a thing, a G, which is a class bar. All of this maps back to the code. You can see here, I've got the G object, which is a rectangle, and blah, blah, blah. And the label up top, all SVG, all scalable. We could theoretically zoom in on this as much as we wanted, and it would be cool. Now, the other reason it's useful to have these things dropped in as SVGs is because now they're a part of the DOM, which I can use and reference later on in different D3 visualizations. Which brings us to the next part of the demonstration. If we go back to my code, scroll down, I'm done with the Java. Oh, this is all just setting up the histogram, and you can see this is written for real intro level, so you can go through it and copy and paste. I talk about each different section. Set up our SVG, set up this thing, nest the elements, etc. Scroll, scroll, scroll. I talk about data binding, which is a useful concept when you're using D3. A little polishing, I add some styling. Isn't this beautiful? Look at this beautiful styling, right? The magic of CSS. And then we get to the real juicy part. So creating the zip code map. So back to our actions, I've created a basic one called zip map, where I just say, give me all of the zips. I was doing a little bit of shuffling. When in early testing, I had it just pass me back like 5,000 examples from the database because I didn't want it to render this giant canvas every single time I was doing stuff, so I just tested it. The shuffle made it so that when I rendered the map, it looked like a semblance of the United States as opposed to being like the first 5,000 rows in the database. And I get a really nice looking picture of Ohio or whatever. Style things up again. I use a canvas in this particular case. A canvas, unlike an SVG, is a pixel map, so it becomes pixelated if you zoom in on it. D3 gives you access to both. It's useful when you're doing things like rendering 43,000 points to use a canvas versus an SVG. Why?
Nodes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I drop 43,000 SVG nodes onto a web page, it will crash my browser, and Safari will like refuse to open ever again. Or Chrome or Firefox, they're all the same. They're all the same. He was like, "Oh, you use Safari?" I was like, "Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's all the same." doesn't matter. In theory, right? Like in a theoretically pure world, all of them should be converging onto the same browser, right? Because JavaScript it's coming from a standard, which is defined somewhere. The way you render it.
If all of them were
blah. Yeah. Yeah. Some basic styling, blah, blah, blah. And then we add our basic script to prep our view. So this follows the same pattern as before. I make a call via my model to my database to grab a whole bunch of data points. I organize them and sort them in whatever way I want inside of my action in the controller. I pass that off to a view, which makes a call to a JavaScript function, which then makes all of the necessary D3 calls to provide me with a picture, whether it's an SVG, whether it's a canvas, whether what have you. And okay, so here we are going through that process. And this is a critical part right here. So going back to Mike Bostock and his provision of all kinds of useful tools. In the particular case of maps, he provides us with a number of geographic projections, so global projections. And anybody here who likes maps or whatever knows that there's all kinds of different projections that we can view the Earth with. In this particular case, I'm using an Albers projection, which I always feel fancy saying. Albers. You can see here, this is where I set up my projection. I do a translation to make it look nice within the little div that I've assigned for it on my page. And then for each of my data points, I take a longitude and a latitude. I do a little bit of rounding for the purposes of mapping it to my screen. And I go for it. And if you keep going down, okay, this is more advanced. So if you do all of this, what you end up with is this, right? So this is every single zip code in the United States, the center of the zip code, according to some database that I found somewhere, dropped onto a two-dimensional Cartesian plane, right, longitude and latitude, and you get something that looks like probably what the United States looks like, right? If you map it to a flat surface. It looks way better there. I don't know if anybody's...
Oh, you like that one?
Yeah, look at that.
Right on this screen.
Looks way nicer. Except, what's that red line?
Okay.
Is this dead pixels on the screen?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
North red line.
This demarcates where the giant earthquake in California will separate the country. To freak out, yeah, anybody who, yeah. So, okay, so you do that. Now, so this is useful, great. I've got a map, but limited value in like, okay, I hit a page and it produces this thing. Why not just put a JPEG on there, right? Like it achieves the same purposes. But the beauty of D3 is that in addition to providing you with access to all of these primitives that you can quickly map and flesh out onto a web page, is it also has an interaction framework, right? It gives you things like the ability to do animations and to select things quickly, blah, blah, blah. So that's where this then comes into play. I've got like a whole demo here, again, very Rails-centric, about how to set up a form and how to process inputs from that form, probably insecurely. I haven't deployed this anywhere. I don't think I'm doing any input validation or anything like that, but that's okay because I only host it locally. So it's all right. And you can see here, this is a very valuable piece, right? So D3 select input. So I can create an input field and I can have it keyed on the key up action. So we were talking earlier, you mentioned a little bit about how you can do things like set up triggers on your form fields or on your web page actions or whatever. And in this particular case, the key up action in this input, what's the proper phrase here? The key up trigger? The key up event? The key up event triggers this thing called render, which is a method that I define. And right here it's a stub, but if we go over to the code and we go down to zip map, render zip map, you can see that I'm doing some stuff here. I'm actually doing a tween, sort of, where I do a comparison of the new zip map versus the old zip map to see if there's a difference. And if so, I produce a little bit of an animation. So, magic cooking show. Again, let's go back and see what comes out of the oven. Here's my little form field. And if I come in here, and what's the zip code here?
076.
Something.
It's a unanimous decision here. So, all right, well, I'll type in 2, and you can see it begins to do a tween. And then you guys said 0, 7, 7, 1. You can see the white dot. Oh, 701.
7701.
7, 7. Yeah. 2, 7, 7, 0. All right. You. What is it?
207701.
That's too many numbers. Just 0. Okay. Green Belt, Maryland. Hooray.
There we go.
Now, so this is the neat part, right? So we talked about how when I drop an SVG onto the page, that then becomes a part of the DOM, which I can reference, right? So that's what this demonstration does, is in addition to manipulating this here and doing that tween effect, which is pretty neat, and also producing my big pixel. I think that's actually what I called the variable that defines this little bold pixel. And the name here, it also links back and it highlights my Maryland bar for me, right?
I thought this one was not an SVG.
Wait, is it?
I thought you said this was
Canvas
wait,
right
it's
there
a
at the bottom?
canvas, so
Let me
I'm
see.
confused how it-
It is a canvas.
Oh, okay.
The map is a canvas, but the histogram is a
data is also
SVG.
So D3 handles that
So
canvas
you're
stuff for you,
actually
I
able to
guess.
I'm actually, what
hidden
I'm,
elements within the canvas, even though it's not.
no. So what I'm actually doing is I'm producing 2 versions of that canvas, and then I'm tweening between them. right? So I'm doing like a little bit of animation magic, right? Because I've got my old one, which is this, the whole shebang, and every single time I do a key up, I re-render that canvas, and I do a tween between the new one and the old one, which gives me that little transparency effect, and then also does the highlighting for me. So it's a little bit of visualization magic, right?
Okay. So for Canvas, it does a re-rendering, while with the SVG, it'll just update the actual DOM.
Exactly.
A question from
transparency. You can have an SVG sandwiched with a canvas straight on top of each other.
That's true.
So I did like a map of Baltimore and use SVG for the borders, but then for the 90,000 points I was putting on the map, use canvas.
Yeah. So exactly. So that's another thing you can do. So you can slice them and dice them however you want.
There's also a question on Hangouts.
Yeah.
It says, how many points can you handle with the image? We ran into an issue using a different library, whose name I can't remember right now, because they were all effectively SVG rather than PGN.
So I kept saying like approximately, but we can just go to CD database, and this is all in a SQLite database. So dev.
Part of the other question too was, are you running on the back end, which I think you already talked about, is rendering on the client.
JavaScript, so it's rendering inside the browser, right? So this is all client-side rendering. The only thing that I do on the server side in this particular case is make the call to my database and do any pre-processing of the data. So when I produce that histogram, for example, I do the grouping on the server side within my action. I package that as a JSON and then shunt it over to JavaScript, which is running inside the client, right? So yeah, so you do the pre-processing on the server side, and then you let the browser do its magic. Okay, SQL. So select count star. What is it called? Zips. From zips. Select count star from zips. Yeah, so 42,049 points on that canvas. There is a little side demo to this where I actually do render it as an SVG, and it breaks the browser, right? Like it's just like your browser comes to a screeching halt and goes, I can't deal with it. So. Correct. Yeah, and WebGL is fantastic, obviously, for certain applications, right? I mean, it's one of the coolest technologies on the web, in my opinion. But yeah.
Speaking of WebGL, has anybody had any experience melding D3 and WebGL?
I have
Something
not.
I've been thinking about, but yeah.
Yeah, I have not.
So like I use Plotly, which is Plotly, and it has a WebGL interface too, so you can just for different plots that are really heavy, you can switch to WebGL.
So you use Plotly?
Plotly, yeah. It used to be proprietary. Well, it's still proprietary. Now it's open source. So as of 2 months ago. But it does things like histograms and like standard plots that you want to give to producers. Sort of handles that all, the D3 side.
Also, just to mention, when the notes go out, there's 2 notes. There's like the official notes, and then there's like the community notes, that sort of thing. Seems like a lot of people have knowledge about D3. I have absolutely none. So if you put some of your knowledge into that area as well, that would be useful for the rest of the community.
Yeah, share your knowledge, guys.
Yes, well, share. It's now a White House mandate.
Yes, totally.
Waving my bat. Wave.
So let me see. What else did I put in here? Double looping, which is the tweening that I do. Transition between the 2 layers, so the new map and the old map. I talk about how to do that. There's this there's a tweening function whose name I forget. I don't think it's tween, but it's something that allows me to do that transition. You can see I do a canvas transition here. I guess it's just called transition, where I manipulate the opacity of one layer versus the other, and then remove the old one. We jumped a few steps, but there you go. Pretty, right? So that's it. So anybody who actually wants to go through this, feel free. It's online. Download it. Like I said, if you follow it step by step by step, you will end up with a thing that looks like this. It only makes a couple of assumptions, like you've got Rails installed, and yeah, you have like a modern version of Ruby installed. And I was actually very surprised that this worked, because I wrote this back when like Ruby 4, or when Rails like 4.2 or something was out, and Rails is up to like 5.1 now, and I updated it and it worked. So magic. I guess I wasn't completely sloppy when I did it.
There was mention of one framework on top of there. Are there other frameworks that are useful for manipulating or doing? Because not all of us are going to be doing very intensive, specific graphics, but we may all have charting.
So
sort of stuff.
Yes, there's a couple of resources available to you. So first off, if you go to the blocks, which is the page that Mike Bostock maintains, there's a bunch of like primitive visualizations, the bar chart, the pie chart, the line chart. All of these things are kind of bread and butter visualizations, right? And you can just grab the code and you can dump it your JSON and it'll make a pretty chart for you. So that's one way to go about it. It is my preferred way, just because D3 is real nice in that it lets you get at the primitives. However, if you're willing to look the other way with licensing, as a lot of people are, you can go find the free version of pie charts and just use that. Pie charts is another framework that's JavaScript based that really is limited in what it lets you do, but you can make your bar chart and your line chart and your. It's not, no. Yeah, you actually have to pay for it, but you can. People, I have seen this in many places. go look at go look at GitHub, and you will see a number of ripped off versions of high charts checked into repositories. So go figure, right?
Huh.
I try to be a good person, you guys. Like when I do stuff like this.
Is it a quote unquote fork? I guess though, like pie charts. I don't know. How they doing this?
I don't know, but like in my vendor assets. I'm a real stickler when it comes to like when people are building Rails projects and they start dropping like JavaScript and CSS in the actual app assets folder or the lib folder as opposed to the vendor assets folder. I get real nitpicky. I'm like, that's not where it's supposed to go, because I always create this little sub thing called licenses where I drop a text version of the license of the thing that I'm using, because that's what a nice netizen does, right? So yeah, high charts, you have to pay for it, but
there's a number of other ones.
Moral ambiguity allows you to find free versions of it and use them. That's one thing. Processing, also, which was the thing I mentioned earlier, has a lot of primitives for basic charts, and that is now a JavaScript library. So Ben Fry and his buddy, they did a JavaScript port. Back like 5 years ago, they dropped the whole Java applet thing, because that's what you used to do. You used to write a processing sketch, I think they were called, processing sketches. It looked a lot like if you were writing code for an Arduino. It had like a little tiny API for you. You wrote your code, which was very JavaScript-esque, I think. And then you would hit render. It would produce this little Java applet, I think, that you could then drop onto a web page, and you could have your visualization there. They dropped support for that and slowly transitioned over to having a JavaScript version of processing, which is now available and completely overshadowed and dwarfed by D3, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so that's... in my normal form. I am way over caffeinated, so if anybody has questions, feel free.
So
yeah.
D3 can do Canvas, SVG, and WebGL?
The WebGL part I'm not necessarily sure about, actually. Yeah.
For sure, everybody know.
I don't know if it's doing WebGL through D3 or it's all seamless to
But Canvas and SVG for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you say Canvas, usually there's a whole bunch of SVG manipulation built into D3. With Canvas, it's usually more, well, I'll take the D3 scaling capabilities. You can scale and map things into places, but you're still making direct Canvas calls.
Yes.
But that's the nice thing about JavaScript. It's like, well, I'm still just using JavaScript. You can, I assume you can do the same thing with WebGL. You just set a transformation based on a D3 scaling or something.
That's
you're still getting the advantages of all the graphics processing, before you actually get to drawing graphics, and then you just quick implement the drawing graphics part yourself.
Yeah. Very, very well stated. Yes.
I don't know if I quite. I didn't see all the lights. Come on. Sorry.
Any other questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, thanks, Kareem. And,
no worries.
Brian, for presenting. Very good jobs. Like I said, 2 weeks from now, I can't remember the date. 2 weeks from this Friday, We'll meet again. We're going to be talking about React.js. The next meetup after that, we don't have a topic per se. One of the ones that we were floating out there, it's not necessarily highly voted, but I think it'll be useful, is kind of a lightning talk session. Does everyone, well, let me explain what lightning talks are. They're generally really short talks, like 5 or 10 minutes. No, not 5 or 10 minutes, like 5 to 7 minutes, something in that range. We can talk about anything you want, and what we're thinking about is talk about maybe some of the projects you're working on, some of the code that you're working on, that sort of thing. Not the manager's pitch, right? Like, oh, this is what my thing does, but like code aspects of it, so that we can all benefit from learning some of those things. It gives everyone a chance to, or more people a chance to present without the pressure of being the only presenter, right? It'll ease your way into presenting. Once you do it once, I think everyone like does it multiple times to share what you learned, what you're doing, that sort of stuff. The link for the issue will be in the go out. I keep trying to say show notes because listen to so many podcasts. It's not show notes. It's not a show. We have notes. They'll be in there. If there's not a topic in there that you want to like list it, by all means, add it. Maybe you put a message in. There's not a lot of people. I think the top rated one is this one. But I had like 5 people in here right now. So if you vote on something, it's very likely that's going to get very near the top. Right? If you really want to see something in particular, add it, vote on it, maybe even ask other people to vote on it. And if you really, really want it, say that you're going to vote. You're going to speak about it, and it will shoot all the way up to the top. Guaranteed.
So you'll paste in the link to the issue.
Yeah, shoot. It'll be in there. It's very simple, actually. If you go to
it's also pinned to the GSFC there. Slack.
It's in the Slack.
Okay. So it's
in
the
the Slack.
one pinned on the side.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Also, great. I'm glad you mentioned that because a number of times people go in, but they don't know how to vote one thing. So they kind of like, oh, I like this one, but they don't vote on it. Right? Joe also put in a really good graphic in there showing how to vote for something. If it's already been voted on, it's very easy. You just click the thumbs up, not to vote. If there's no votes on it, it's a little tricky. You have to go to the little smiley face on the side, create and pick the thumbs up, and that's basically a vote.
I think you have to revoke your previous vote if you change it.
Now I think if you click on something else, it'll just undo. I mean, if you click on it again, it's going to undo your vote. So don't vote things down. Be nice. Man,
like this one.
Yeah.
There's no way to sort by ups minus downs anyway. So.
Yeah, but just don't be mean.
So the Ruby mantra, Mott's is nice and so we are nice. I don't know if any Ruby is in here. There you go.
We're all nice, therefore we're all nice. Just be nice. If you're not nice, pretend.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. The notes will come out very shortly. If you can send me your notes.
Sure. Once I get back.
Yeah.
Once I can get on Slack.
Do it now.
No, I'm sorry.
Do you want to mention?
Thank you. If you haven't signed the time,
Yeah.
you can sign this. That's what actually keeps the pizza flowing and it allows you to.
And so what is hack?
My contract. I don't know. They pay me. I just go with
Oh my gosh.
So then this way, instead of taking
a
this,
lot of stuff and it's really good
come here and
defaults.
check out the entire history for a specific account, or just help them
Yeah.
with the search terms.
Okay.
Right. If they want to see what currently is
Yeah,
anything.
but I mentioned it because I've been using
Oh, they
the
put the
different
XML
ones,
into it,
the
but-
mini condos.
What do you mean?
What
It's-
is for distributing
yeah.
like
They
not
put
just
in
examples, but like
Yeah, they put
things
in
kind of like we have a lot of like C++ code that we need to
Okay.
we don't
So there's sealed with
like,
stuff on.
so I've been using the
So
condos
use like
building
a
process
calibration
to
tolerance, basically.
ship
I thought you were like
C++
trying to
code as well as
at first
code. And then and now we're looking
I don't know,
at
you can
explain it really well.
Sorry.
Say Docker.
It's sort of like a very lightweight virtual machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
That's
different
one of the
examples.
topics on our. That's one of the. I added Docker in there. I would love to use Docker. Like, there's a few like Christine I know uses Docker, and a couple other people are
they bring the
using it.
samples first so they can double check.
But
like,
I have no.
is the
Like,
instrument
I've
still
read about it.
working
I've heard about it.
exactly
But I
the
have no
same?
actual
Okay.
experience in
I
using it.
think so.
Well, and also like
Yeah.
the web development, going from the perspective of large data or big data, because some of these things like using SVGs, you know, a lot of number
I mean,
of points
technically
breaks things down.
502,
Yeah.
I can't use them.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean,
That
all the work I've
is
done
another
is 699.
aspect of
Yeah.
all
Well,
this.
me too.
Yeah.
If you get to yeah, for the
Like,
visualization
technically,
stuff,
it's
like
like
we're
software,
using Plotly
but
because
not
it has a
really
nice
like
Python
software,
name.
right?
So you can just write your plot code and
Wrote me
in
down
NumPy and
Yeah.
stuff, and then directly generate the D3 graph from the so
High school?
with like
2011.
linking up stuff.
Okay, so you're.
I think the harder part is like getting the JavaScript stuff because I never coded in JavaScript before, but it's
Yeah.
great.
JavaScript is like that language everyone uses, but no one knows.
But I'm
Yeah,
really
so
curious.
I look back
They
to
also
it.
have like MATLAB and